Aloha kako, and welcome to another episode of Kanaka Express. I'm Kali Gumapak, your host. I have three special guests joining me tonight. I've got Dr. Willie Kawai, Donovan Preza, and Lawrence Gunshore. Willie, maybe you can explain to our audience tonight your specialty in research.
Aloha, mahalo for having me. My research, I just finished my PhD from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. My research looked at citizenship laws in the 19th century, in the Hawaiian Kingdom era. It looked at the legal evolution of those laws, the rights, the civil and political rights therein. It highlighted the different, or the multi-ethnic composition of the Hawaiian citizenry at the time. Throughout the constitutional era, from 1840 all the way up to 1887, to the more crucial or pivotal times of the kingdom's existence, and where you see some of the really sharp changes being made to citizenship, but all laws really. And it uses the 19th century as a backdrop in analyzing or looking at current politics today, with regard to identity, with regard to race. You look at something like the term Hawaiian in the 19th century, it had a completely different meaning than it does today. And so it starts to get into asking those types of questions of why is there such a different meaning with regard to the term Hawaiian in the 19th century till today? What were some of the political events, the legal and the illegal events that took place in kind of reshaping our understanding of the term Hawaiian, but citizenship more generally?
Okay. That's in a nutshell. We're going to be talking more about it, and also the interrelationships between your research and also your research, Donovan. Maybe you can explain your specialty and where your research is taking.
Thank you. Mahalo for having me, us. Pleasure to be here. My research is focused on the Mahele of 1848, so land titles, issues with land titles. More specifically, Hawaii's transition to private property, how that transition took place, why that transition took place, looking at those kinds of issues, but also looking at those issues in the sense of how they affect today and what the link between today and what historically happened over 150 years ago. You name your land issue today, it has genealogy back to the Mahele of 1848. If you're talking crown lands, ceded lands, any of these issues all have genealogy or roots back to that era. So that's my era of expertise, so to speak, Hawaiian land titles.
Okay. Lawrence, how about your area of expertise and specialty?
Okay. Aloha mai. Thanks, Kala, for having me. My just little background information. I did my master's in Pacific Island Studies before joining the political science department, like Willie. And so I have this kind of really background, a really deep interest in the Pacific region as a whole, not just Hawaii, but the entire region. And so my topic for my PhD in political science is kind of I'm doing a kind of regional survey of state formation and nation-state building in the Pacific Islands in the 19th century. So I'm trying to put the Hawaiian Kingdom that we all know about and have talked about a lot, to put this in kind of more of a regional context, and thereby also into a more global context, as a kind of leading non-Western nation state that was being formed during the 19th century, and how it then became a kind of a model and a pivot, so to say, for the entire Pacific Islands, for Oceania as a whole. So I'm looking at similar developments aiming towards a formation of a nation state in other Pacific islands like Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, Tahiti, and other places, and then how Hawaii, as I guess the more developed or earlier recognized model for them, became really influential, and also how Hawaii's policy, like a kind of a really kind of declared Hawaiian foreign policy throughout the kingdom, pretty much all the way from Kauikeauli's time to King Kalakaua's time, was to foster nation building, stable native governments, and political independence for the entire Pacific Ocean and for all the different nation states that were emerging in the South Pacific. So that's kind of in a nutshell my current research.
Well, this is going to be a really good discussion tonight. So don't change the channel, because this is going to be really good, because this is going to be two parts. So this is just the first part that we're going to be talking about. With the research that all three of you have done, I know that it overlaps, and you guys must have sat down and discussed, some of the, or a lot of research that you have done. What stands out in your minds that is just poignant to you, Willie?
One of the things that I think really stands out, and I think it might be a common theme throughout. I've had the unique opportunity to be around scholars such as Lorenz and Donovan for maybe 6 or 7 years, and it's through these discussions, through the sharing of research, through dialogue, through debate, that really helped to kind of shape my dissertation, my research. But I think the one thing that really stands out and is common, I would say, amongst all of our discussions is I think how little we know about the 19th century. And I mean, it seems every week that we get together, either Lorenz and Donovan or a number of other scholars that are doing the same type of research, bring something new to the table. I mean, they bring a new piece of history to the table that kind of reaffirms this idea. Say, wow, I never knew that. And I mean, and it's really kind of a testament of I think how much more research needs to take place in the 19th century, and how significant that research is today when we talk about the current implications or the current matters that are taking place. But yeah, I mean, it's overwhelming when you see this these new ideas being brought to the table, and this is weekly, right? This is happening once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, where I'll get a call or an email from one of these two people saying, "Did you know this? Or did you see this?" And so it's exciting.
Well, it would be really interesting to be a gecko on the wall listening to all of you guys getting together. I mean, just imagine all this information that we can be putting out on the blog, with all this information. Is there anything that sticks out in your mind that you believe people need to know?
I think specifically talking about our history, first off, I would agree with Willie and what he said. My research isn't where it's at without this group of friends, this group of scholars. If you're looking at the 19th century, you're in the archives, and how many documents and things you have to read through before you find the one that is actually pertinent to what you're looking at. But that's where these relationships come in handy, where we know what other people are looking at. Hey, Willie, this isn't for me, but I ran across this for you. But specifically in regards to our history, I think one of the big overlaps is how the overthrow of 1893 is basically treated as inconsequential. And by that I mean it's treated as if it was not a big thing, as if they had already accomplished overthrowing Hawaii in 1848 in regards to land, or in 1820 in regards to religion, or in some other time period. A lot of the history books, Willie's work, he identified a disruption in the 1887 Bayonet Constitution, which he'll talk about later. In mine, it was the 1895 Land Act. So it's all of these events around the overthrow that I would say are more, help to shape the reality that we see today, more greater than some of the events that have been identified in the history books prior to our research. The Mahele, religion, introduction of Western law, whatever it may be. That idea of treating the overthrow as inconsequential, I think, overlaps through most of our research. That, not to put words in Lawrence's mouth, but I know me and Willie have had this discussion.
Like,
And in terms of
the discussion that you and Willie have had?
about this, the overthrow, for me, Kamana Beamer has also done research on this, but events around the overthrow, events around the Land Act. Land Act is when they confiscated the Crown lands. Land Act is when they start the homesteading programs that encourage settlers. And this is where our research overlaps, Willie's and mine, because settlers are enticed to come to Hawaii through the incentive of land. So that affects the nationality, that affects the land and land titles. So a lot of your homesteads on the Big Island, Ola'a, in my master's thesis, I looked at Ola'a. Not a single acre of land was sold in Ola'a, Puna, on the Big Island, prior to the overthrow. Well, that's because it was Crown lands. And prior to the overthrow, you could not have sold a piece of land in Ola'a. But it's through the Land Act of 1895 that Ola'a was confiscated, then made a homesteading program, and then sold to others. So that's an example. Willie can talk about the bayonet and how that introduced race to Hawaii. So there's a lot of things around that overthrow era that I think people have ignored.
You see that a lot in the policies that come out. You know what I mean? Whether it be the apology resolution or the Akaka bill, there's this kind of seamless narrative that runs straight through 1893 and gets to 1993 as if there wasn't this rupture, you know what I mean, of a country. I think that's what you're kind of pointing out, and all of the narratives that you see within policies such as the Akaka bill or the apology resolution, they're very simplistic. You know what I mean? And they do treat the overthrow as if it doesn't have any consequences today. And I think what you're starting to see with kind of this new emergence, or this magnifying glass, if you will, being put on that event in 1893, you're starting to see a lot of this research kind of unveil the consequences, right, of 1893, unveil the consequences of the United States illegally occupying Hawaii.
And I think we get there because all of our research now understands the significance of 1843. We all understand the significance of Hawaii's recognition as a country. And earlier historians they don't talk about that. They don't talk about Hawaii's birth as a country. Yeah? It's framed as if Westerners came and imposed themselves and gave us Western law, gave us private property, gave us these things. And this is where Lawrence's research is really interesting, because he's making the comment, and I won't speak for him too much, but he's making the comment that, hey, Hawaii was the model that these other oceanic countries were looking at in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s, and Hawaii served as the model for their constitution, for their, maybe Lawrence could.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can just my kind of link my mind now right with yours. I mean, you know, you're in geography, and I know you and Kamana always tease me and call me a closeted geographer, even though I'm in political science. But there's some truth to that. I mean, it is actually about, you know, geography and even like, I mean, geopolitics. I would almost say. You know, I mean, you just to kind of come back to your point, you know, the Land Act, or maybe not the Land Act itself, but the discussions around it, that's actually when the term mainland is being invented for Hawaii. I mean, nobody in the kingdom would call the United States the mainland, because, I mean, the mainland, if anything, was maybe the Big Island or maybe Oahu, depending on whether it's size or population size. But you know, I mean, that would be the. I mean, maybe you can. You know, I don't want to get into those kind of politics, but I mean, I'm just saying, like, I mean, nobody would have called a foreign country the mainland during the kingdom. Now, in the discussion of the Land Act, when they talk about the luring Americans to settle in Hawaii, then they start talking about, I mean, Dole, I think, uses the term in a letter where he says we need Americans from the mainland to come to Hawaii. So that's actually the genealogy of that name. Like nowadays, everybody uses that, and most people don't really think about anything. They don't have a political agenda. They just use it like as if, well, we're going to the Big Island or we're going to the mainland, just as if it's just a naturalized kind of thing. But it actually it's actually part of this kind of taking Hawaii out of its proper place in the global world and putting it into this kind of appendix of America. You see that on maps. You see like those maps of the United States. I mean, anywhere in the classroom where you have the 50 states, and you have like Alaska. You have an inset with Alaska somewhere, which is scaled down because it's too big, and then you have the other inset with Hawaii. And if you're lucky, it's at least kind of towards the direction where it should be, like west of California, but in some maps you even have it somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, even more off. So you have this kind of Hawaii as kind of an inset that it's kind of some kind of unimportant outlier of the U.S. And then you get, and when you are there and you see those maps, of course, you see like that's the mainland, those 48 states over there. Now, if you look at a map from the 1800s, then you have a totally different perspective. You have Hawaii as those islands in the center of the northern Pacific, about equal in distance from East Asia on one side and North America on the other side, and then equally important is kind of very close to all these other Polynesian islands south of it. So I think it's this total shift in kind of a global and geopolitical perspective of Hawaii that really draws into the things that you're saying and you as well. So. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, back in the 1800s, as you mentioned, the Hawaiian Kingdom was really an important country. I mean, there were maybe about 30, 40 important countries in the world. There was a lot of injustice. Obviously, a lot of places were colonized by Western powers. So I'm not trying to deny that, but. In this kind of, I guess, unequal order of only about 40 powerful countries in the world, Hawaii was one of them. And that's something really important to know. And especially for the rest of the Pacific, as you mentioned.
When you say Hawaii was one of the powerful countries in the world, I mean, Hawaii was, you know, these small islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Can you explain that?
Yeah, no. I mean, it is true. It was a smaller country. I mean, I'm not claiming it would be completely ludicrous and crazy to say that Hawaii was one of the kind of global powers. Obviously, there's nothing you could compare the Hawaiian Kingdom to, like the British Empire or to the French or the United States or the German Empire. But what the important point here to make is that you could definitely compare it to some of the smaller European countries, and in terms of its global importance and its global power, it was definitely no less important than some of the smaller nations in Europe, you know, like places like, you know, Denmark, some of the smaller German states, Bavaria, Saxony, I mean, before German unification. You know, there's definitely like Hawaii. Well, first of all, back then, global population was much less than now. That's one thing. So if you have like about 100,000 people, which Hawaii had at the time, that was, you know, more significant than a 100,000 people country is today. Well, that's just even size-wise. I mean, you know, looking at Hawaii Island and the chain of the chain of the Hawaiian Islands, that's still bigger than at least 5 or 6 European countries today. Just the size. So in that sense, it's not as small as people sometimes think it is. And then if you compare it to the other Pacific islands, there's only one major island group, which is Fiji, that is a little bit bigger in terms of size. If you compare it to Tahiti, Samoa, like you name it, Hawaii really stands out as being a pretty big country, actually. And then secondly, in terms of importance, I think if you look at international diplomacy, that's where really that importance comes in. Of course, in terms of military, yeah, I mean, Hawaii didn't have like warships all over the world for sure. But what Hawaii did was Hawaii had diplomats all over the world. And that, I think, is really significant. I mean, very few of the smaller kind of countries in that order of size had over 90 diplomatic missions all over the world. I mean, just in the U.S., you had like, I don't know, I mean, you had a legation, which is like the old term for what's now an embassy in D.C. You had a consul general in San Francisco. You had like at least 5 or 6 consuls in all of the major U.S. cities. And that's just the U.S. Then you had like, you know, the Hawaiian legation in Tokyo. You had a Hawaiian consul general in I think France, in Moscow, in London, several ones in the UK throughout. Germany, I think 3 or 4 different diplomatic posts just in Germany from the Hawaiian Kingdom. And then throughout the Pacific, of course, you had a Hawaiian consul in Fiji, one in Tonga, a vice consul in Tonga, a vice consul in Samoa. You had a Hawaiian consul in New Zealand, in Auckland. I mean, you know, you name it. There was a network of diplomats spanning the world that could totally rival any of the smaller countries of Europe at that time. And that's where what I mean about being like one of the important countries of the world.
Well, I think this brings me to the next question. And in your area, you know, the mindset where what happened, you know, to change all of this stuff in mindset and nationality? You know, because obviously today, you know, people here in Hawaii, we're not thinking that. You know, I mean, what happened?
And then that's the $1 million question today. And I mean, I think that's the question that all of us are trying to answer, right? Is what happened? Because we didn't grow up learning this stuff. I mean, we got.
Now, from what Lawrence just said, with the Hawaiian Kingdom having the legations and understanding of international law and the influences that it had all around the world, and the influences, which it sounds like it was substantial.
I mean, when we talk about Hawaiian diplomacy, and I think that's very much another PhD in itself, right? For someone to do that paper. I mean, Hawaiian diplomacy was the way in which not only Hawaiian sovereignty was established and put together, but it was the reason why the Hawaiian Kingdom was able to survive in the 19th century. And I mean, and this is not just happening with Kauai Keuli in 1843 or in 1842 when he sends out the envoys to Europe to seek recognition. This is starting even during the time of Kamehameha, right, where the chiefs of Hawaii are having to engage politically with Europeans. I mean, it's during this time of Kamehameha, they're realizing the type of power that countries like France or America or Great Britain assert. And I mean, throughout the world, but particularly in the Pacific. And it's one of the places that my research looks into is the diplomatic relations that Kamehameha had with Great Britain, Kamehameha the First, that is. The different relations that he established that lasted not only during his lifetime, right? Not only lasted during the lifetime of Kamehameha, but into all of his successors, like Liholiho, right? Liholiho goes to London in 1824, but very much you see that diplomatic relationship with Great Britain continue even into the 1840s, right, 1842. And so I don't think it's necessarily a surprise that the largest and most powerful country in the world, in Great Britain, decides to come out and recognize Hawaiian independence in 1842. Right? These are diplomatic relations or engagements that are happening way before Kamehameha III comes into the picture. But very important, right? These are very important, and it was these types of diplomatic relationships that were created with Hawaii and the rest of the world that allowed the Hawaiian Kingdom to survive in some very rough waters, right? The Hawaiian Kingdom becomes the first non-European territory, non-European nation to acquire Hawaiian independence. And what's interesting about that, you know what I mean, is that the Hawaiian Kingdom kind of breaks the color barrier when it comes to international law, right? Prior to this, international law was really kind of looking out for Europeans, right? The only people that could join the family of nations during this time were people that had the right skin color, and that was white. 1843, something happens, something changes when it comes to international law, and you have one of the first brown countries becoming a part of this so-called family. That's a very, very important history that we need to become not just familiar with, but we have to know. Something that we weren't necessarily taught in the public schools when we were growing up. Yeah.
Well, and this brings me to, your specialty, in terms of, the land base, because, the chiefs were trying to be very protective of the lands and not being, or at least that's what we were told, and trying to make sure that the lands were kept, within their control. And this was one of the reasons for the mehele to come into play. And maybe you can expound on that and their protectionism for the land in order to prevent the outsiders from divvying up the small islands that they had.
What I found through my research is that the majority of the myths, or the majority of what I would call misunderstandings in regards to land, come from the 28,000 acre Kuleana statistic. So that statistic that says Hawaiians only got, not Hawaiians, Makainana only got less than 1% of the land. 28,000 out of 4 million acres, less than 1% of the land. And from that, you get many explanations as to why. Oh, Hawaiians didn't understand the process. Oh, Hawaiians didn't have money. Oh, Hawaiians. All of those explanations for that question have since become truths. And become truths without us interrogating them. How do we know Hawaiians didn't have money? How do we know Hawaiians didn't understand the process? Well, it's because they didn't get land. You look around today, it makes sense. Hawaiians don't have land today. We didn't get land from the source, from the original division. That explains the disconnect. Yeah? What my master's research found was we actually got land through royal patent grants, through the fee simple sale of government lands. If you go and read Section 4 of the Kuleana Act, it states there are land in lots from 1 to 50 acres will be given to those at a minimum price of 50 cents per acre to such natives who are otherwise unfurnished with land. Tens of thousands of acres are purchased through that program. But that doesn't show up in the 28,000 acre statistic. Yeah? So, but our understanding today of our contemporary reality is, oh, it was the Mahele. Part of this narrative is, oh, the chiefs didn't want to let go of their land, so they were trying to protect for themselves and kind of isolate the Maka'ainana class. I take a different view. Kauikeoli Kamehameha III, in Privy Council, he discusses one of his main reasons for the Mahele of 1848, for the transition to private property. They have at their disposal a bunch of different Kent's commentaries on the laws on American law, Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of. All of these are named in Privy Council records. In one of those sources, it talks about private property being respected in the event of colonial takeover or imperial takeover. So at that time, it was lawful under international law for one country to go into another country's territory and acquire the territory of another country through conquest. So had a country, Britain, France, whoever, come to Hawaii in 1847 before private property is established, took over that Hawaii, they could have then confiscated all lands that were not private property. That would have been all 4 million acres. Kauikeoli realized this, and he said, we need to get our lands in private property to protect everyone, the people, chiefs, and Maka'ainana in common, to protect everyone in the event of colonial takeover. He goes so far as to say, hey, I want to make sure my lands, my crown lands, are considered separate and distinct from the government lands. I want them in a separate book. I don't even want that division to be on the table for discussion of confiscation. Yeah? So they go through the Mahele, create private property, but the story is framed in this other way. The story is framed in this way because we're relying on this 28,000 acre statistic. We're relying on this idea that Hawaiians, Maka'ainana, did not get land, which is false. Go to the Bureau of Conveyance. Go look at all of the sales between 1846 and 1870. All the names are Hawaiian. If we didn't own the land, how would we sell it? How do we all today have a story of loss of land in our own families if we didn't have land in the first place? You go ask a Hawaiian, you got a story of loss of land in your family? Yes, everyone. But I thought we didn't get land. So it's these kinds of fundamental assumptions that we have to relook at. I'm not saying Hawaiians didn't lose the land, but we haven't been asking that question because we assumed they didn't get it in the first place.
And that's why 1893 is consequential.
And that's why 1893 matters. That's when they change the land laws. That's when they're in control of government. You get in control of government, you can change the law. You get in control of the judiciary, you control interpretation of law. Who became the judges after 1893?
So in 1893, clarify that for me. What do you mean by that?
Well, broadly speaking, right? So
Yeah.
there's no singular event that you can put causation on.
Because we know that's when the
Everything.
overthrow took place.
Yes.
So does that mean that when the overthrow took place, you had the insurgents now controlling the Bureau of Conveyances?
Well, they now, after that time, slowly infiltrated government.
Okay.
Yeah. So as time goes on, some of the overthrowers are now Supreme Court judges in the post 1893. Yeah. So they're now in control of interpretation of law. Yeah. They start to infiltrate slowly. They change land law in 1895 with the 1895 Land Act. They do homesteading in 1895 to encourage. So it's an eventual process. The disruption isn't an event or a moment. It's actually a period. But it's that period where we went from the Kingdom of Hawaii government to the Committee of Safety government. That's the huli.
Okay.
That's kind of this shift in 1893. And I don't mean to make it oversimplify it, because it didn't happen on January 17th, 1893. It's not that simple. But that huli, I would say, has more to do with our common reality of today than the Mahele of 1848 or something.
Well, and also, I mean, just to continue that, the same. It's not you're right. It's the people who were on the Committee of Safety who then infiltrate. I mean, they control land, they control the judiciary, but also, and I think that's really important too. These are also the same people who are the founders of the Hawaiian Historical Society. They are the ones who are actually in control of producing what is considered the standard history, and very deliberately, like from the very beginning on. Like you look at the Hawaiian Historical Society about the founding members. It's like the same, it's exact same kind of roster of people that you find on the Committee of Safety, that you find in the so-called Republic of Hawaii Parliament, Senate, or whatever they called it, which was not even a real republic. It was just like, pretty much people appointing themselves, had nothing to do with democracy whatsoever. So I mean, these kind of, it's the same people, and it's the same people who control and then there's this famous quote, I forgot who, I want to take credit for this because it's not me who discovered it in the primary source, but somebody else did and said it a few times. I think Damon, the Minister of Finance and big banker who was part of the inner circle of Doldem, he said, like, if ever we want to have peace and annexation, we need to control the past, something like that.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I mean, and that's not just him saying it. That's a very deliberate policy that they did. And then, so pretty much from the 1880s onwards, you get these, like, the market, at least the English-speaking readers' market, book market, gets flooded with these kind of biased propaganda works produced by those people.
They found a way to infiltrate nearly every sector of society. Earlier, you asked, why don't we know this today? How come we know Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, but we don't know Timoteo Ha'alilio, we don't know Sir George Simpson? We don't know our founding fathers who birthed our country, but we can rattle off all the presidents' names.
Yeah.
It's part of this infiltration. My wife is doing research on similar matters, and she found a quote, and I just asked her today who it was from, but in the territorial days, the Big Five were basically described as a hay, and they had their tentacles on everything. Art, the history, the archives, the Bishop Museum, Hawaii, the National Archive. The National Archive gets incorporated into Bishop Museum. The National Museum gets incorporated into the Bishop Museum. Every facet of society gets controlled and infiltrated. In those books, there's that those charts that show how the Big Five are basically on every single board and every single committee of every single other. That's not only in business, that's in historical societies. The wives are doing the art. And not to mention the Americanization pamphlet. I know you're familiar with that. There's a systematic Americanization process going on in the 1900s, 1910s, 1920s to teach a very different history, and not the history of this place, the history of the mainland that Lawrence was referring to earlier. And that shift in perspective where Hawaii is no longer the mainland and it's now we're an appendage to America, I think it is a very revealing perspective. It's Hawaii, we were the center of the Pacific. Sandalwood trade with China, we're involved with that. Whaling. Cattle becomes an industry in Hawaii to supply the whaling ships. Everybody going to the Pacific Northwest, Alaska, Aleutian Islands area. Civil or discovery of Pennsylvania oil, that's what stops whaling in Hawaii, that's what stops cattle. After cattle, now you get sugar, now you get these other industries. Hawaii's always been international, always been global. Its economy has always been affected by these global events. Why is sugar so important? Because of the US Civil War. North's cut off from the sugar in the South. North needs sugar. Where are they getting their sugar from? Hawaii. World events have always affected, we're a small bunch of islands, but our location has been significant throughout history, and I don't think we realize how important we were internationally and globally, allowing us to get recognition and favorable relations with Britain in the 1790s. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, and just to connect to what you said, you mentioned the China trade. I mean, and that's actually the other thing. It's that is so totally like not talked about today, is like Hawaii's influence in East Asia and for East Asia, and especially for China. And that's something that I'm just recently found out by going through some sources, going through some Hawaiian sources, also going through some Chinese sources, which I don't speak Chinese, but I have a friend who translated a few sources for me. It's really interesting. And it connects to your research too, really, about you talk about the Chinese too. The first, and I think the first and largest foreign immigrant group in the Hawaiian Kingdom were actually Chinese. It wasn't the Howlers, everybody talks about them, but they were always kind of a small group, small minority, but it's actually the Chinese was like kind of the first kind of mass migration to Hawaii. And of course, and the stereotype is that they were all plantation laborers, which was true for many, but some of them, they left the plantations and went into business. Some of them came from China right away as businessmen, and they weren't even going through that route at all. So there was always a kind of a very diverse, very sophisticated Chinese community here. Now, what people don't realize is that, first of all, this was like one of the biggest Chinese diaspora communities in the 19th century. This was before Chinatown in San Francisco became as big as it is now, or like any other Chinatowns. And then secondly, it was the only overseas Chinese community where Chinese had equal rights, because everywhere else Chinese were discriminated against, both in North America and also in Latin America, in Peru or in Mexico, and anywhere they were they were needed for their labor, but they didn't get any rights. In Hawaii, they were treated just like any other immigrant, and if they lived 3, 4, 5 years, they became citizens or like nationals. Now, the point I want to make though is that this Chinese community then becomes really important, not just for Hawaii, which is like, I guess, your topic mainly, but it is also really important how this becomes important for China itself, because among those Chinese who were here during the kingdom is one man that everybody in China knows. He's he's just as famous there as George Washington is for the U.S. But most people don't realize the Hawaiian connection. I'm talking about Dr. Sun Yat-sen, of which I think there's 3 or 4 statues in Hawaii, and he's the one who led the revolution in 1911 against the Manchu dynasty. Now he was educated in Hawaii, in the kingdom. He attended first Iolani School for a while, and then Punahou School as well. He in 1882, I think, or 83. While he was at Iolani, he won the prize for, I think, either best or second best English composition. So imagine it, like he's there among all these Hawaiians, also among all these English immigrant children, because it's an English Anglican church school, and there's this Chinese guy who writes a brilliant essay in English, but nobody really thinks that nobody is shocked about it. They just acknowledge it. And so King Kalakaua comes into the graduation ceremony and gives him personally a prize for having made this 12-year-old Chinese boy. Now this same guy later overthrows the Chinese Empire and is the founding father of modern China, and appreciated as such in both Taiwan and the People's Republic.
Give him the quote about his influence.
Yeah, exactly. And then what's now of course people usually it's and that's the other thing, like the Chinese. Well, I don't know what Chinese historians write, because I would need to read like thousands of pages in Chinese about him, which I cannot. But I know that all the English-speaking historians and there's just in English, there's about 30 books about Sun Yat-sen written in English. So world historians or English-speaking historians of China have dealt with this guy like in all details. But they usually dismiss his schooling in Hawaii as being, Hawaii is like. Some of them even mention he attended American schools in Hawaii. Well, hello, this was like 1880s. This wasn't it was schools of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Has nothing to do with America. So it was usually dismissed in the sense of he got kind of Western education in Hawaii. Well, no, what he got in Hawaii was an education in this kind of hybrid system that was the Hawaiian Kingdom, that had both native and Western elements in it. And so and later it becomes important because Sun Yat-sen is famous for his political philosophy is trying to combine the West and the East. Like he was, I mean, his philosophy of modern China is to have to take all to take the best of Western technology and combine it with kind of Chinese
That's
traditions.
incredible.
And so he and not just that, but he actually has made those statements where he says it was like later in 1911, I think he came shortly before the revolution or shortly thereafter. He came back to Hawaii, visited, and he said it was here that I learned what modern civilized governments are and what they mean. So
Sun Yat-sen saying this about the
About
Hawaiian
Hawaii.
Kingdom government.
exactly.
Wow.
Not
It
about
is-
the territory of Hawaii,
Yeah.
but
Wow.
about the Republic of Hawaii or the provisional government, but Kalakawas.
Exactly.
I hope
Government.
everybody is listening to this because this is what the Hawaiian Kingdom government is all about. We need to get people to jump on board to support the Hawaiian Kingdom government and learn Hawaiian constitutional law. Wow. I had no idea.
Mhm.
This is incredible. This is incredible. Oh, us? This just made my show. Oh, this is great. This is awesome information.
Well, I'm going this later this year. I'm going to Taiwan to a Pacific History conference, and I'm trying to make a presentation. I'm going to make a presentation about this. So I hope that more Chinese historians will actually pick that up and do more research, because there might be tons of writing in Chinese about this. Maybe his own writing, his writing by his friends. I don't even know. I mean, I think that's a huge untapped resource, probably in Chinese. About there might be much more stuff about that, about Sun Yat-sen's the origins of his political philosophy being grounded in like the Hawaiian Kingdom government system. So I mean, it's all open-ended, but I'm really hoping to get more Chinese historians to look into that in more detail.
I've heard both of you reference in talking to other people, about trying to get, the people today to try to put themselves back to the way the Hawaiians thought back in the 1800s, in terms of their understanding of politics and their understanding of, I guess, constitution and the legal aspects, so that they can understand international laws and so forth. Can you guys explain what you guys meant by that?
I'm probably going to ask you to clarify the question a little bit.
Let me jump in, Kale, and then if Willie can jump in after. In my master's thesis, I used this metaphor from a book by Richard White, and the title of that book is Middle Ground. And in that book, he uses this metaphor of the West and the indigenous. So the West being the sea or this wave, and the indigenous being rock. And this constant pounding of the sea eventually eroding away the rock. So in his book, Middle Ground, he's trying to say, hey, the story's not that simple. It's not just you're either the rock or the story is more complicated than that. So in my master's thesis, I made a play off of that metaphor, and I introduced Hawaiians into the equation. And I said, hey, here you have Hawaiians. Here you have stuff coming to Hawaii. Boats are coming, Europeans are coming, ships are coming, the waves. The 20-foot surf is coming, pounding away, eroding away Hawaiian values, eroding away Hawaiian shore. And the metaphor that I propose is Hawaiians as surfers. You don't have to be the wave, you don't have to be the rock, but you can be the guy out there surfing the wave. Yes, it's treacherous. Yes, it's life-threatening. That wave can kill you. Yeah? But at the same time, I think our ancestors had a mastery for what they knew they could control and what they knew they couldn't. And those things that they couldn't control, I think they let those things go. You cannot stop. The foreigners are coming. What you can control is how you interact with those foreigners. Kamehameha I's brilliance with Vancouver, how he interacted, his diplomacy, Napoleon of the Pacific. Yeah? He knew he couldn't stop Napoleon from coming. He could control how he interacted, and his relationship with. Yeah? And I think that's the diplomacy Willie is speaking to that I see in my research. Our ancestors were brilliant at that. Today, I think we spend a lot of time trying to stop stuff that's beyond our control. That doesn't say give up, throw your hands in the air, but I'm saying the lessons I learned from these stories are different than, hey, stop everything. Stop what you can control, and that's all you can do. You cannot control whether foreigners are coming or not and how long they stay and these things. You have to focus on what you can, and that's part of getting what you're saying. I think that question, maybe if we can go into the second show with that question, I can elaborate on it more in terms of this mindset, because I think the mindset is the most important thing. In regards to land, and I'll be quick, Willie. In regards to land, I see a lot of us contorting the principles that our ancestors left for us in the 19th century to win something today, to get a piece of land, to get a victory in a court, and that contortion of principles is a slippery slope. Yeah, I think we have to understand the principles and let the cards fall where they fall. Problem is, we need our government back in place to let the cards fall where they're going to fall, because if America is in charge of letting the cards fall where they're going to fall, we know where they're going to fall. Yeah, that's the problem, is that guy running the show in that sense. The courts, you know this with everything you're doing in court, it's I'll stop there to let Willie, because otherwise I'm going to blow through all the rest of the time.
Okay.
No, but I think what you said about adaptation is important, and that's Kamana Beamer's work. He talks about selective appropriation, right? Meaning that what was interesting about the Hawaiian Kingdom government, right, is that it wasn't just a foreign imposition, right? It wasn't just a colonial institution that was created by a European country in the middle of the Pacific, but in fact it was it was an Aboriginal population that was using what they needed, right, from other parts of the world, whether it be the West or whether it be the East, as Lorenz's research shows, and they were adapting, right, these foreign concepts and making it something that's uniquely Hawaiian. I come from a Paniolo family, right? From Ulupalakua, and just the concept of Paniolo is somewhat of a representation of this idea of selective adaptation, right? Here you have a foreign concept being borrowed from a place in South America that's being brought to Hawaii, but it's being tweaked. It's being adapted to fit the people or the environment of Hawaii, right, and made something uniquely Hawaiian, and that's how you get something like Paniolo, right? You look at the concept of the Hawaiian saddle, right? You would think, okay, what terminology would you see being used to describe a saddle, right? One of my cousins did his master's thesis on Paniolo, and he lists all of these terms, right? The terms that are being borrowed and used to describe a Hawaiian saddle are parts of a canoe, right? That was kind of the most probably culturally similar mode of transportation, if you will, right? Was this aspect of the canoe. So that's important, right? And so you can start to get into the mindset of a Hawaiian amidst all of this change. And I mean, there, like you had mentioned, there's a lot of change taking place, but they're adapting to that change, right? And they're tweaking it just enough, just right, to make it something that's uniquely Hawaiian. And that's the brilliance. I mean, that's the brilliance that we're starting to get into.
And I would add, they take full ownership of that. Yeah, Ikuwa Purdy doesn't just become an okay cowboy. He goes to Wyoming and he beats all the real cowboys
with somebody else's horse. He's not bringing his horse from Ulupalakua or from Waimea up with him to Wyoming. right? He's using somebody else's va, if you will,
Yeah.
to take down or to win the show, right?
So it's owning the idea, yeah, and I think that's where we fall short today. Is we don't own it. We don't take full responsibility. We don't become the best at it. Yeah, our ancestors were the best.
But even though, right, that idea of Paniolo has its roots in South America, right? It's something that today is very Hawaiian. I mean, it's to some extent it also becomes a metaphor to understanding how the kingdom evolved in the 19th century, right? This idea of Paniolo and this idea of the Hawaiian kingdom.
Slack key,
Yeah.
Kiho'alu,
Kiho'alu.
another adaptation.
And we need for you guys to come down to Kalapana for some Kiho'alu and Kanikapila down there. And I'd like to thank you guys for joining me on this first part of Kanaka Express, because our time has run out on this first show. And again, I'd like to thank my guests, Dr. Willie Kawai and Donovan Preza and Lawrence Gunshore. And please join us again for Kanaka Express, and I'd like to thank you for allowing us into your homes tonight. And again, my name's Kali Gumopak. And again, mahalo Scotty Wong. Right on, brah. You did a great job. Ahui ho till the next time. And catch us part 2, because I'm going to have my guests on for a continuation to all this great discussion, because we're going to be talking more story of some good stuff. Ahui ho.